If you had asked me 5 years ago what made a marriage strong, would have said trust without question. Not just trust in the obvious ways, faithfulness, honesty, but the quiet, unspoken trust that lets two people move in separate orbits and still know they share the same center of gravity. Back then, I believed my husband and I had mastered that. I was proud of it. So when Daniel first mentioned his annual retreat, I thought it was beautiful. A whole weekend alone, once a year, to read, pray, sip a little whiskey, and think about life? It sounded noble. Disciplined. The kind of thing only a person of depth and character would even attempt. I remember the first time he packed for it, 3 years into our marriage. He folded clothes with almost ceremonial care, 2 crisp shirts, 1 pair of dark jeans, a paperback of poetry, and his leather-bound journal. He even slid a small flask into his bag like a secret. Just enough to warm the spirit, he joked. I teased him that he was turning into some kind of philosopher monk, but inside, I was impressed. I barely managed to journal once a month. He was devoting an entire weekend to self-reflection. The morning he left, he kissed me at the door, coffee still on his breath, and promised to turn his phone off. "That's the point," he said with a soft smile. "No distractions." I waved as he pulled out of the driveway, feeling almost jealous of his resolve. For years, I bragged about it to friends. They'd sigh and say, "Wow, I wish my husband did that." I wore his ritual like a badge of honor. Look at us, I thought. So solid we don't even need to be joined at the hip. So secure we can disappear from each other for a weekend and come back stronger. I even made it part of our love story. One anniversary, I gifted him a handcrafted fountain pen with his initials engraved. "For your retreat reflections," I wrote on the card. He hugged me tight and promised he'd fill an entire notebook with dreams for our future. I pictured him sitting in a quiet hotel room, lamp casting a golden circle on crisp paper, sipping whiskey while he mapped out the next chapter of our lives. I never imagined he was mapping something else. sVoices is built for people who can't resist a good story. Subscribe now so you never miss the next twist. Looking back, there were flickers of doubt, tiny sparks I brushed away before they could ignite. Like the year he came home smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his. I told myself it was the hotel soap. Or the time he returned with a barely noticeable scrape on his knuckle. He said he'd bumped a dresser while rearranging the room for better meditation flow. It sounded absurd, but he laughed so easily I let it slide. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. Our house buzzed with ordinary joys, lazy Sunday breakfasts, neighborhood walks, inside jokes whispered across crowded rooms. If someone had asked me then, I would have said we were unshakable. But small things began to tug at me, like loose threads on a sweater. The first real tug came last month. I was paying bills at the kitchen counter, the evening light slanting across the marble, when I noticed a string of charges on our shared credit card. Normally, his retreat expenses were simple. Hotel room, maybe a cafe charge, gas for the car. But this statement told another story. There were charges from a bar, the Copper Lounge, at 1:37 a.m. 2 separate receipts from a club called Halo the same night. And a transaction at a spa that wasn't part of the hotel chain he usually booked. At first I reasoned it away. Maybe he'd wandered out for inspiration, soaked up the nightlife for creative fuel. Daniel loved to people watch, maybe he just wanted a change of scenery. But the hour on the receipts made my stomach tighten. That night I lay awake beside him, the glow from his phone casting faint shadows on the ceiling. He breathed steadily, eyes closed. I told myself I was being paranoid. The next morning, over coffee, I asked casually, "Hey, did the hotel add a new spa?" I saw some charges. He didn't even look up from his mug. "Oh, no. I found a little place down the street. Thought I'd try a massage after all that sitting and reading. You know, loosen up the back." His voice was smooth, easy. Too easy. Something in me wavered, like a picture frame tilted by an unseen breeze. But again, I smoothed it back into place. For a week I tried to forget it. I told myself a marriage like ours deserved trust, not suspicion. Still, a quiet unease settled in the corners of my mind. Then came the night that unease turned into certainty. We were curled on the couch watching a show when his phone buzzed. He'd left it on the coffee table to grab a snack. The screen lit up with a preview of a message, just a few words, but enough. "Had a great time last weekend. Same time next year?" Followed by a winking emoji. I froze. The sender's name was a first name only, unfamiliar. By the time he returned, the screen had gone dark. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I wanted to ask. I wanted to demand an explanation. Instead I sat there, hands clenched, and pretended to laugh at the TV. That night, when he fell asleep, I stared at the ceiling until the digital clock bled into morning. Something had cracked, and I knew it couldn't be patched with pretty words or hopeful thoughts. I waited 2 more days, gathering courage like stones for a wall. Then, while he showered before work, I picked up his phone. The passcode was our wedding date. How ironic. Inside, the truth waited like a trap. Messages from dating apps, names I didn't recognize, photos that made my stomach churn. Flirty texts arranging late-night meetups. References to whiskey bars, dance floors, and rooms with views. Every year, while I pictured him in quiet contemplation, he was losing himself in a different kind of retreat. I sat there on the edge of our bed, phone trembling in my hands, the sound of water pounding the tiles behind the bathroom door. It felt like the room itself tilted, gravity shifting under my feet. When he emerged, steam trailing behind him, I looked up and said the only words I could find. "We need to talk." The words, "we need to talk," hung between us like smoke that refused to clear. Daniel froze, towel around his waist, droplets running down his chest. "About what?" His voice was too casual, but I caught the flicker of panic in his eyes, so quick anyone else might have missed it. I held up his phone. "About this." The color drained from his face. He didn't reach for the phone. Instead, he reached for his shirt, buying time. "What are you doing going through my stuff? That's all you have to say?" My voice shook, a brittle edge I barely recognized. "Not why, not it's not what it looks like, just accusation." He tugged the shirt over his head and finally met my eyes. "I can explain." "Then explain." I folded my arms, gripping my elbows to keep from trembling. For a moment the only sound was the ceiling fan, whirring like a nervous heartbeat. Then he sighed, heavy and slow. "It's nothing serious. Just blowing off steam. Once a year. That's all. I needed space." I almost laughed, a sharp bitter sound. "Space? Daniel, space is taking a hike or spending a weekend reading. Not meeting strangers from dating apps. He flinched but kept his voice low. It's harmless. I never planned to leave you. It was just escape. A way to feel different. Alive. Alive. The words sliced through me. What about me? Am I not enough life for you? He stepped forward, hands half raised as if to touch me, but stopped. You are enough. You've always been enough. This isn't about you. That was supposed to comfort me? If it wasn't about me, then it was about what? His boredom? His ego? I couldn't decide which was worse. I wish I could say I screamed, threw things, demanded details. But a strange calm settled over me, like a thin sheet of ice covering a lake. Get dressed, I said quietly. We'll finish this in the kitchen. Downstairs, the smell of last night's coffee lingered, sour and stale. I poured a cup anyway, needing the anchor of something hot between my palms. Daniel sat across from me, shoulders hunched. For a long time we didn't speak. I watched a droplet of water slide from his hairline to his jaw, tracing a path like a slow-motion tear. Finally I asked, how many years? His eyes flicked to the window. Since before we were married. My breath caught. So every retreat. He nodded, shame clouding his face. A memory flashed, me gifting him that engraved pen, telling friends how enlightened he was. I felt like the punchline of a cruel joke. Why marry me at all? I whispered. He shook his head. Because I love you. I do. These weekends, they were supposed to be separate from us. A different world. I set the coffee down, afraid I'd shatter the mug. There is no separate world. You don't get to compartmentalize vows. He buried his face in his hands. I never wanted to hurt you. But he had. Over and over. And the worst part was how easily I'd believed him, year after year. The rest of that day unfolded in slow motion. He followed me from room to room, offering explanations that sounded like excuses: midlife panic, need for adventure, fear of routine. I listened, but my mind kept drifting to the smallest betrayals. The way he'd smiled at me before each retreat, the way I'd packed little snacks for his drive. By evening, the house felt too small for both of us. I grabbed my keys and left without a word. I drove aimlessly through familiar streets, past the park where we'd picnicked, the bookstore where we'd spent rainy Sundays. Each landmark felt tainted, as if someone had drawn a thin black line through every memory. I ended up at the old pier just as the sun bled into the horizon. Waves slapped the pylons below, steady and relentless. I leaned against the railing and let the wind whip my hair across my face. How many times have I told friends, Daniel and I don't keep secrets? The humiliation burned hotter than anger. A gull screeched overhead, startling me back to the present. I realized I was gripping the railing so tightly my knuckles ached. I stayed until the sky deepened to indigo, then finally turned back toward home. When I walked in, Daniel was sitting at the dining table, head bowed over his clasped hands. The sight almost softened me, but then I remembered the messages, the winking emoji, the years of lies. I can't do this, I said. He looked up, eyes red-rimmed. Don't say that. We can fix it. Therapy, counseling, whatever you want. I shook my head. I want a divorce. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through the silence. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Finally he whispered, "Please." But I was already climbing the stairs. The next week was a blur of practicalities and private storms. I called a lawyer, changed passwords, arranged for a separate bank account. Daniel tried everything: flowers, letters, long late-night talks, but I kept my answers short. One night he found me in the spare room, folding clothes into a suitcase. "Can we at least talk about why?" he asked. "Why?" I snapped. "Because every promise you made was built on lies. Because you chose strangers over honesty. Because I deserve a life where I don't have to wonder what you're doing when you need space. That's why." He leaned against the doorframe, shoulders sagging. "I never thought I'd lose you." "You didn't lose me," I said, voice breaking. "You threw me away, piece by piece, every time you left for that hotel." For the first time, he had no reply. Friends rallied around me. My sister, Lena, showed up with takeout and a bottle of wine. We sat on the floor of my half-packed bedroom, eating noodles from cartons. "You're stronger than I thought," she said. "I don't feel strong." "You don't have to. You just have to keep going." I nodded, grateful for her steady presence. But when she left, the quiet pressed in again. At night, memories ambushed me: his easy laugh, the warmth of his hand in mine, the way he used to trace circles on my back when I couldn't sleep. I hated that part of me, still missed him. A few days later, Daniel asked for one final conversation. We met at the kitchen table, the same place where everything had shattered. "I'm signing the papers," he said. "But I need you to know I'm sorry. For everything." I studied his face, the man I'd loved, the stranger I'd discovered. I believed his regret, but it didn't change the truth. "I know you are," I said quietly. "And I hope you figure out why you needed all that escape. But I can't be here for the next lesson." He nodded, eyes glistening. We sat in silence, two people who had once been everything to each other and were now something else entirely. That night I slept in our bed for the first time since it all began. The sheets smelled faintly of him, and for a moment grief threatened to drown me. But beneath it, a fragile sense of relief surfaced, like the first breath after a long dive. I didn't know what the future held. Only that it would be mine. The morning after Daniel signed the papers, the house felt strangely weightless. For the first time in years, I woke without that low thrum of anticipation, no waiting for his footsteps, no mental checklist of his habits. Just silence. I brewed coffee and carried it onto the porch. The autumn air was crisp, the kind that tastes faintly of wood smoke. Across the street, our neighbor's golden retriever bounded after a ball, tail wagging like a metronome. Life was still moving, indifferent to the implosion of mine. I thought I would feel hollow. Instead, I felt present. Every sound, the creak of the porch boards, the faint hum of a passing car, seemed sharper, as if the world had been waiting for me to notice it. The first weeks alone were a study in rediscovery. I tackled small projects I'd always deferred: repainting the spare room, reorganizing the pantry, planting tulip bulbs out front. Each task felt like staking a tiny flag in my own territory. In the evenings I cooked simple meals: vegetable soups, roasted chicken, recipes that filled the house with warm, earthy smells. I ate at the kitchen table with a book propped open, a candle flickering beside me. There was a quiet joy in feeding only myself, no negotiations about spice levels or portion sizes. Friends checked in often. Lena came by with fresh flowers. My coworker Maya invited me to a pottery class. I said yes to everything, not out of obligation but because each invitation felt like an open window. One Saturday, while shaping a wobbly clay bowl, Maya asked, "Do you ever regret it? Ending things so fast?" I wiped my hands on a towel. "No," I said after a moment. "I regret believing the lie for so long." "But leaving?" "No." Her smile was gentle. "That's strength." I thought about that word, strength. It didn't feel like heroism. It felt like choosing honesty over comfort, one small decision at a time. Sometimes, though, the past ambushed me. A song on the radio would summon an old memory, a road trip through the mountains, his hand resting lightly on mine. For a heartbeat, the ache returned, proof that love doesn't evaporate on command. But I learned to let the memories pass like clouds. They were part of my story, but not the ending. One evening, I found the fountain pen I'd given Daniel years ago, the one meant for his spiritual reflections. It lay forgotten in the back of a drawer, still smooth and elegant. I turned it over in my hands, the engraved initials catching the light. I considered throwing it away. Instead, I cleaned it, filled it with ink, and began to write. At first it was just scattered thoughts, how betrayal feels like being unmoored, how silence can be both enemy and friend. But soon the words formed into something steadier, a record of reclaiming my life. Winter arrived early, wrapping the town in frosted quiet. On a snowy afternoon I drove to the pier, the place I'd fled to the night everything cracked. The water was dark and restless, gulls wheeling against a pewter sky. I stood at the railing, breath puffing white, and thought of the woman who had clutched this same metal months ago, knuckles aching with fear and rage. She was still me, but changed. The difference wasn't just the absence of Daniel. It was the presence of myself. I whispered into the wind, not a prayer exactly, more a declaration, "I'm still here." The waves answered with their endless rhythm. In February, my lawyer called to confirm the divorce was final. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the quiet for a long time. Final. The word didn't sting. It settled. That night I opened a new journal, one I'd chosen for its soft leather cover and pages thick enough to drink in ink without bleeding. I wrote. I believed in a life we didn't have. He believed in an escape that wasn't real. Now I believe in myself. It wasn't poetry, but it was true. Spring crept in with shy green buds. I began taking long morning walks, savoring the smell of damp earth and the chatter of early birds. Neighbors waved, I waved back. Once, I passed a young couple laughing as they balanced takeout coffee and a leash tangled around their legs. For a flicker of a moment, envy prickled. Then I smiled. Love was still beautiful, it simply wasn't mine to carry right now. People sometimes ask if I'll date again. Maybe. But I no longer feel the urgency to fill the quiet. The quiet is where I finally hear myself. One Saturday, months after the papers were signed, Daniel emailed. A short note, "I hope you're well. I'm working on myself. I wanted you to know I'm sorry, truly." No plea for reconciliation, no hidden agenda. Just words. I read it twice, then closed the laptop. I didn't feel anger or longing. Just a soft, distant gratitude that he'd acknowledged the wreckage. I didn't reply. Sometimes, when I light a candle in the evening or sit with a book and a glass of wine, I think about the irony. His so-called spiritual retreats were supposed to help him find himself, but in the end, I'm the one who discovered something real. Not the self I was with him, always trusting, always accommodating, but the self who can stand alone on a windy pier and feel the world spin steady beneath her feet. And that, I've decided, is the truest retreat of all.